Hello there, welcome to Music Ally Focus with me, Music Ally's editor Joe Sparrow. Now, one of the things we're always trying to do on Music Ally Focus is to scratch the surface of the music industry and see how it all works beneath, and also to find out whether it is, as is sometimes rumoured, all held together with sellotape and bits of string, or whether it's a hotbed of slick tech innovation, or perhaps both. Now, one topic that everybody's interested in is money, and in recent years some big shifts have happened that make it a hotter topic than ever. For instance, labels, artists, musicians and creators are all working in completely different ways, generating millions of micro-royalties every month across global campaigns that involve multiple partners across dozens of countries. Now, getting your music out there is easier than ever, but processing that increased volume of payouts becomes a lot more complex, particularly if you're a label and have multiple artists. We all have an expectation as well these days to get paid quickly and see what's going on and what we're owed at any given time. So to find out what's happening at the point where all those payment pipes meet, we partnered with a fintech company that processes tens of billions of dollars of payments every year. That's Tipalti. Now, Tipalti work closely with labels like Ninja Tune to pay their artists what they're owed, and we chatted to Tipalti's Travis Hughson about what labels need in 2026, what artists want when it comes to payments, and how to maintain trust and transparency to keep all parties happy.
All right, well, I'm very happy to welcome Travis Hughson from Tipalti to the podcast. Hi, Travis.
Hello, how you doing, Joe?
Good, all the better to see you. Now, we've got a good chat here about something that can often feel a little bit opaque or difficult to understand around payments and how all those complex systems work. But before we dig into that, can you just give us a bit of oversight, like who you are and what Tipalti is? And also, what do you do at Tipalti every day?
Yeah, sure. Sounds good. So, like you said, my name's Travis Hughson, currently living in London, UK, but hailing from the west coast of Canada. Got my start in the scene in a bit of an ironic way, to be honest. I don't really have a music background, but I do come from the world of big data and security. So jumping over to Tipalti was a bit of a natural fit, given our interest and speciality around the digital space. So what I do on a day-to-day, I lead our sales team for the EMEA region, focusing on said digital space with a big caveat and focus on the music sector. Tipalti itself is there's a lot of ways you could put it. Essentially, it's a love letter to the finance team. So if you think fully automating from the start to finish is kind of where we sit in without disrupting any historical process or tech that the business has in place. From a music perspective, we really hone in on onboarding artists with different labels and helping pay out royalties.
So obviously this is something which I think everyone listening to has a vested interest because they all like getting paid. They like getting paid quickly. They like transparency, accuracy, all these things that we come to expect in the modern world. And of course, historically, the music industry has had a looser approach to some of those things or imperfect, let's say. But when we see in the sort of the modern world, we see a song being streamed or a campaign that has lots of creators involved in it, whether that's a song or a video or whatever. It all sort of just happens from a consumer perspective. But we know also from the behind the scenes, money is being created, divided up and piped to lots and lots of people all over the world. And it's happening millions and millions of times every day. So first of all, like, how do you deal with that kind of, let's call it chaos, the massive volume of tiny payments?
Yeah, sure. I think chaos is probably the best way to put it. Just to preface too, Joe, I'll do my best to kind of talk from both sides of the scenario, one from the label who's making the payments, and then one from the artist or the agency that represents the artist that's receiving the payments. And also, this is just my opinion from working with labels. So it's going to be a bit biased. But like you said, it's really chaotic, right? There's a number of moving pieces and it's not as simple as plug and play. Firstly, you need to onboard them, right? So if I'm a label and I sign a new artist, the attention is typically on the excitement of bringing them on and starting a new project and releasing music and going from there. But there's the nuances behind the scenes, as you rightly put, right? You know, if I'm that new artist, how do you actually know me from a data perspective and how are you going to get me paid when those royalties start coming in? So that's the first piece. There's a lot of complexity in that. And typically that's done fairly archaically, right? It might just be pen and paper. It might be a team that's capturing it manually, which opens up a bunch of risk to human error. There's also the internal and external communication risks, right? Like if I'm that part of that onboarding team and I'm trying to get in touch with you as the artists, you're probably busy and probably don't care about giving me payment details, right? So that in itself poses a bit of a challenge and is why the industry has kind of stayed static, right? They don't want to disrupt those relationships. And they don't want to risk, for lack of a better word, pissing anyone off.
Yeah, that's the magic behind it. You don't want to kill the goose that laid the golden egg. You've got to keep that balance between payment and creativity. It's very, very fragile, isn't it?
Exactly. There's also, and this is kind of the boring stuff, but it's really integral and important for businesses to understand, is that you're handling sensitive data, right? So I'm sure most labels that are listening or people that are listening deal with spreadsheets, Google Sheets, Excels, whatever it might look like. But there's payment details on that, right? So there's the element of fraud, what we need to be really careful of. And I know no one wants to talk about it, but I'm sure there's been, money released from a label that shouldn't have been, which also poses a bit of a challenge, specifically considering, that money might have gone to the wrong person. And cash is king, right? Like money is tight in this industry. It's always kind of the forefront of the thought. A couple of the nuances in that, like the cost of payments, right? Most of the labels we work with have artists that are global. So if you're trying to send money to Brazil, for example, there is a cost of transaction. Who carries that cost? How does the money get there? Are you dealing with any FX? That type of thing. And then the last couple pieces is like the competitiveness in the space. Historically, labels have done the royalty runs biannually, but there is an interest from the artist side to get that money faster, right? So do you actually have the ability to, if you're paying, call it 5,000 people on a biannual basis, to do that 4 times a year? Typically, the answer is no, because I know, based off experience, it takes that team of royalty specialists 2 to 3 weeks to get everything prepped, and then a week or 2 to get everything approved, and then a scramble at the end to make sure they've got the right account details, which typically is the biggest bottleneck.
And that's really the tension that we're sort of discussing here, which is we have from all perspectives, consumer side, artist side, label side, everybody's side, we see how technology allows things to happen almost instantaneously, and we have the same expectations around money. And yet, of course, as you've just talked us through there, the reality is very complex, takes a lot of time and resource, and there's all these moving parts. There's fraud to think about, and the human element, I guess, and it's about striking a balance between it, which is a tension. From a creative perspective, right? They want to get paid on time, right? Of course, and that's about money, but it's also about the sort of trust relationship with who's paying them. And when I say who's paying them, there's a chain of people. There's a trust chain there, if you like. So we're also operating in a world where releases and campaigns are global now. It's you have to look everywhere, and that's overwhelming. So there's a lot of changes happening. That then involves changes to how payments work. You can see where this is suddenly getting extremely complicated at huge scale. So what is a mistake that you've seen, or that happens a lot, that slows down these payments or frustrates creators? How can that be avoided?
Yeah, I think your question's kind of two-folded. So I'll talk about like the risk of retention, and then the mistake that the labels that are paying are making. So the first and foremost is like it's 2026 now, right? So that increased volume of people that are, in quotations, needing to get paid is a lot higher. It's not like the 60s or 70s where you've got 10 to 20 bands globally that are kind of controlling the space. You've got tens of thousands of artists that are trying to get paid and that rely on that $500 to $5,000 check they might get, whether it's monthly or biannually, whatever it is. But it's important, right? So I think the first mistake is like assuming the retention is there and being a bit complacent and not really taking to account the importance of that relationship.
So you mean like not recognizing that the artist is essentially saying to them, "Come on, pay me better on time, and I'm relying on you to do this."
Exactly. It's really competitive, right? Like there's a lot of different AI agencies we'll get into. There's a lot of kind of new age labels that are trying to make a stir. There's a lot of artists that are just taking the complete like self-represented route because they don't trust the historical way of doing things. So that's the first mistake I've seen labels do, is like they kind of take for granted the relationships they have. Second piece is taking the cheap option. Like again, right? And there's a few labels that I can't name that we're currently working with. There's some that I can, but they all kind of have a common thread, which is risk appetite. They've done it the same way for 20 plus years. Why change? Right? And they typically just take the cheap option, but we know like cheap or inexpensive is always very expensive. So I guess it's just how you draw the line between, when it's the right time to make that change versus when you need to critically make a reactive decision, which is always the wrong way to approach it. And in that, I guess, like sticking with the old ways, that's probably the biggest mistake, right? You'd be shocked at the archaic approaches that they take, which is no judgment, like at all. But to have years and years of backdated statements and ledgers of, artists they've onboarded, and no one's actually gone through it to ensure that artist is still there. The information's still right. Like it just creates unnecessary work.
I think people listening are nodding in agreement and have probably experienced all of these things from speaking to people in that space. The idea of archaic pieces of paper floating around and no one being quite sure is one of those weird quirks of the music industry that I think everyone would be happy to eradicate. So, but also it's understandable, isn't it? You've got you say it is a hard industry. It's constantly changing. The pressures are high, and maybe you just don't have the headspace all the time or the resources to make what seem like big changes. But yeah, and that's the trap, isn't it? Because artists are not in that space and they're moving in a different lane, and you've got to keep up with them.
If I may too, just to like another comment on that, because the fear of or mistakes I see them making, some suggestions or just like educated guesses on what I think they're probably thinking in areas that I could direct them to, would just genuinely be like taking a step back and looking at the system they have in place, right? Specifically with the micro macroeconomics, like cash is really, really important for everyone involved in this conversation. So I know the bias is always towards the label. They're the ones that put up the money. They're the ones that take the risk. And the artist is just seen to, kind of sit there and take their check when they get it.
Yeah.
But I would really encourage people to start building a system that can scale with the business, right? Like if you're happy with the static ways, no problem. Maybe don't change it. But if you want to make an impact in 2026, 2027, and so on, like it starts with the fundamental process, and finance is ironically always kind of left last to any innovation or investment, which I find like wild considering it's essentially the heart of any business. So,
but again, that's the tension, isn't it? I guess you've got people who are very often doing something in this space for the love of the art, the love of the community. This is something that's really important, and you. Yeah, I think we've all fallen into that trap. You sort of think, I'll figure the money part out later. Even though, yeah, it is. If you were sort of coldly analytical, it's super essential. It's testimony to the industry in some ways that that's what drives people forward. That they're doing it for the art, the love of creativity, and yet all of a sudden it becomes important. And you were talking about onboarding earlier. Is that the kind of thing that if you let's say you're talking to a new label or something like that, is that the kind of, do you have a level of interaction with them around like what their systems are and if it aligns with what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of labels will rely on like royalty management platforms where they're helping track and understand who to get paid and how to get paid. Obviously this is a bit biased, but Tipalti's perspective is we don't need to be the forefront of that operation. We don't need the clients and the artists to know that it's us helping in the background. We want the attention to be on the retention and relationship they have with their artists. So we just come in, we automate the onboarding process. They obviously have a fairly large Rolodex of artists currently onboarded. So we'll help them kind of sift through that data, make sure it's cleansed and clear.
Right.
And then we just leverage our platform to help what would typically be like 5 or 6 different payment batches, depending on the payment type, the volume, the amounts, the currency. We just put it into one major batch and it's essentially a click of a button. So really the biggest benefit is time saved because it allows them to focus on, growing and expanding the business rather than spending 2-3 weeks pulling their hair out trying to get the royalty run ready.
Yeah. And so that's at the sort of that stage where the money that's at that stage where the labels are essentially processing information and paying out down towards the artists. But then at the other side of that, you've got millions of tiny payments and royalties being generated all the time that are going to creators or are owed at some point to creators. And then you've got these labels, essential partners in the middle, which have all these pressures we talked about. So what is your advice beyond what you just said in terms of helping them track all that, keep it accurate, maximize how much money is coming in that is owed to them? Because of course that then keeps the artist happy and retained. So what else can they do to keep that accurate in the middle?
Leverage the technology that's out there available, right? Like I know it might sound obvious, but there's a lot of labels that don't, right? There's a lot of royalty teams that are drowning in spreadsheets and different ledgers and trying to figure out who gets a wire transfer versus a paper check. It can be quite stressful. And again, we know the reputational risk if that money isn't paid, right? Obviously, everyone's lenient, but we keep going back to the artists here. Like you need to keep them happy. And a missed payment or a late payment is always going to plant a seed of doubt.
Let's then skip over to the creator perspective then. We mentioned earlier on, creators, they want transparency. This is artists. The number one thing they say to me whenever I speak to them is, I just want transparency. I want to know where I stand, what the relationship is, how it works, whether that's about money or anything. And they want that transparency into what they own, when they get paid, and being part of that process. So let's sort of take it back to the position of what happens from your perspective when that transparency is missing.
I mean, it's the age of needing to know and needing to know now, right? There's not a moment in my day where I have a question that I don't have the ability to get that answer, which is we're very privileged to have that mindset, but it also creates like more urgency and the need, the desperate need for transparency. So it's really simple on our side. We don't overcomplicate it. If I'm due to pay you something, you'll have clarity beforehand. And then while that money's in transit, you'll have clarity of where it is and when you can expect it. It's as simple as that. Honestly, but that is missed if you're doing it the old school way, which is creating the payment batch and then having to speak to the bank, getting the bank to approve it, and then send that payment. There's 4 or 5 steps that we can eradicate and just have a direct relationship between you and the artist.
What are you're working, let's say, with labels, and let's say you've helped to transition a label across to a more sort of modern, transparent system. Are they telling you what the feedback is from artists?
Yeah, absolutely. And we also we do our best to speak to the artists where we can, where it's appropriate, to have that personal interest. Otherwise, it's always going to be a biased approach. The other piece of the puzzle too, which I'm sure some listeners are thinking if they're a smaller label, is, well, Travis, I don't want to pay that money if I don't have to. Right? Cash flow management is really critical for any business. So it's a fine line to balance, and it's very subjective to that business and where they are in their journey. But I also think it comes down to risk appetite, right? Ninja Tune is a really good example. A UK-based label. They've got quite a good reputation in the space. A fairly large Rolodex of artists. That was a project that I personally worked on with them. It was a long time coming, right? It wasn't just me trying to sell software. It was me trying to educate and understand and be empathetic to the royalties team, to the finance team, and then most importantly to their artists, and then collectively come up with a solution. Now, it wasn't rocket science. Luckily, we've got the platform to do it, which is the bias piece. It's Tipalti, and why I think it's an integral piece to the cog, but it's not the whole wheel. So it's just that final little piece to create clarity in the communication, to create clarity in the payment, keeps everyone happy, and it saves people time. It's our most important resource as individual.
Yeah. Ninja Tune, obviously a very highly respected, successful international label, some great artists. I mean, maybe you can't talk specifically about them, of course, but when a label comes to you beyond, you said that it was a sort of long process, and understandably so, right? Making any kind of step change is a big commitment to any level of label, right? So what sort of assurances are they looking for when they are talking to you about wanting to switch to work with you, and what they're looking for when that happens?
Yeah, I think there's two perspectives, right? With Ninja Tune, they'd already kind of come to the conclusion they were at critical mass. So it's a different mindset when they come to us. It's more looking for, hey, we recognize this problem that's historically been there. We're at a point where we're willing to introduce a bit of risk to our business in an effort to change it. Versus if it's a smaller label that isn't really at that critical mass, they can handle the volume of payments, their risk appetite's going to be a lot less. So I approach those situations, and my team approaches those situations differently. But specifics is protecting the relationship they have with their client first and foremost, right? And if that has to be it. So then and again, it's just communication, like letting the artists know that we're going to make a strategic business change. It's going to benefit you. There may be a few hiccups, but in the end, we're all going to be better for it. And I think that's what the team at Ninja Tune did really well, is they weren't afraid to tell their community and let them essentially be a part of it. And that kind of set the project up for success. But there was a lot of, the reason it took time is we were both being very agile, right? It was an opportunity for Tipalti to kind of stamp our name as a part of the solution for this historic problem, but also as an opportunity for Ninja Tune to be kind of at the forefront, the ones to kind of take a stand and say, you know what, we don't need to do it this old way. We're tired of dragging our people through the mud internally to get these royalties done. Like let's be proactive. So it was a really cool project and something that
I'm sure. Yeah. This is the point in the podcast where we inevitably turn to AI, because any conversation in any part of the world now is impossible to have without talking about it. But obviously, the music industry is very focused on like the music generative AI, but the thing that I keep hearing is that there is also promise of what I've heard called mundane AI, which is instead of the sort of flashy uses that we're talking about creating music, but the use of AI and associated technologies behind the scenes, maybe at a sort of like a protocol level or efficiency level, making things work better, and you're sort of seeing incremental changes and benefits because of that. So, I'm sure that's happening on your side as well. Can you give us any insight on that, on processes that have gone from being awful to smoother, or technologies that have really helped take steps forward in that sort of behind the scenes element?
Yeah, I think that is a massive conversation, and I'll do my best, Joe, to keep my perspective to the finance side, because to be honest, I'd be stepping out of my lane. My biggest advice for anyone with it is take it slow, right? It's just like any tool. Eventually someone invented the hammer to help build houses, right? That was a change, but an integral change to an entire industry. So I know it's going to have a really deep impact. I know it's something that people shouldn't sleep on. Learn to use it, or it'll surpass you. From the finance side specifically, like we use AI in our platform to create efficiencies and save time. That's kind of the forefront of our perspective of it. So it's very calculated. It's very educated when we introduce it. In the music side specifically, where I see it having the biggest impact is helping capture the correct details for artists and validating those details throughout the process, right? Historically, a really long process. It's going to simplify that and bring it down to a matter of seconds rather than hours or days. And then from an operating side, all the approvals, everything that historically it's quite a manual intervention. That's where we're typically seeing the biggest benefit, is introducing AI into that process, where we're seeing significant time reduction.
And is that something, like you say, everybody is being cautious, but also I think the smart choice, like you said, is to start using these tools and to cautiously use them and integrate them in smart ways. When we talk about efficiencies, we've already talked about this kind of the vast volumes of payments and data that is coming in, and that's overwhelming. So what tools are you sort of, or what, maybe not specific tools, but what specific problems do you sort of hope that these kind of AI-oriented tools might solve into, I don't know, data matching, data analysis? Can you throw some light on it in terms of like the human impact, like what it might help you do better and faster, and what the knock-on effects of that are?
Sure. Again, specifically from a finance perspective, I think it just eliminates the human error element with money leaving the business, right? If you're paying an artist, $50,000, you want to make sure it's going to the right person.
Yeah.
You want to avoid any conflict with that level of money being transmitted, right? And that number can fluctuate. It can be as low as $10. It can be as high as 5 million, right? Like it's so subjective and so varied. The higher the amounts, the more risk, the more attention's put on it. I'm not saying AI will eliminate that, but I will say it'll give the business a lot more confidence that it's going to the right person. And the confidence piece, I think, is the most integral. I've seen it time and time again where you've had different payment batches ready for approvals, and the higher it is, the more approvals, the longer it takes. The compounding effect there is the individual receiving has to wait longer.
So ultimately, it's coming back down to that idea of, again, it's sort of creeping towards serving the realistic desires of artists, songwriters, creators, which is, can you show me how this is happening, and can you do it more securely and pay me faster? and that's those little efficient, those small things actually add up to stop that.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's as simple as clear communication and execution swiftly to ensure your people get paid. It's just like anyone, right? Like if your boss stops paying you, it's going to plant the seed of doubt.
Yeah, and then we are sort of future gazing a little bit here. You've talked about how technology might impact that whole value chain, but you are also talking about very modern technology retrofitting into an industry that has been around for a very long time, right? So the music industry, let's say the recorded music industry, has been around for over 100 years, or approximately 100 years. And then the music industry itself, where money has been generated from music, has been around for, in a sort of modern sense, has been around for much longer than that. So you are bringing this technology that has all these impacts into this world, and there are residual behaviors that perhaps, like we've said, understandably, are sort of still lingering. So if you could wave that magic wand, I mean, I'm talking about not just from the making your life at Tipalti easier, but also in what your values are, what you are trying to achieve for those onward facing people who are receiving money, right? So if you could wave a magic wand, what would you share? There's no blame being put on music companies here, by the way, but if you could wave a wand and get them to do something differently, what would those things be?
That's a really big question. I've got my biased intent here, which is I would love for people to entertain the conversation and just really challenge the norm without me having to challenge it for them. I'm happy to do it respectfully, obviously, but I'd love people to come to the table and have that tough conversation of how things could be better, which I know they do, but it's typically upstream. It's not downstream. This is the final piece of that puzzle, right? Putting money in the artist's hands faster. I mean, I've got a lot of friends that are artists. I see it like real hand, not just from a Tipalti bias perspective. I see the struggle and I understand the importance of that relationship from their perspective too.
And that's a real chicken or egg situation, isn't it? Like I'm sure everybody wants to be able to pass the payment on faster, right? And everyone wants to receive it faster. And yet you've got to get this infrastructure in place to enable that. And then I sort of feel your pain a little bit that like there's a sort of promised land over there if only we could all get on board. But that's also not how life works, is it? What are you sort of hoping to achieve with your team in the coming years, like year or so, that sort of helps you get towards that point?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. Our intent as a team and as like individuals, very empathetically, is not just to sell software for the sake of it. We really want to educate and be seen as a trusted advisor rather than just a salesperson, right? So I think that's the biggest piece for me, and the biggest challenge is creating a space where people trust the intent, but they also trust the outcome. So that's the effort, and that's where like really fostering relationships with the labels we have now is going to help us, because incestuous is probably the wrong word, but I think it's the absolute right word for this space. It's very much who you know and how you know them. And word of mouth is better than any type of other efforts we could do. So
that comes back to trust, doesn't it? Again, that's the key thing in your whole approach.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, if for people who are listening, there'll be some links to various Tipalti things around the podcast for you to go and check it out for yourself. One final question for you, then, Travis. And we've talked a lot about payments and music business, but from a music perspective, let's say hypothetically, talking of data, that your streaming platform had all the music deleted from it, apart from one thing that you could choose to retain. What would it be? What would be your one? It can be a song or it can be an album. I'm feeling flexible. But what would be the one thing that you would keep?
Can I pick two?
Okay, go on then. Yeah.
All right, I'm a big old school rock and roll fan, so it'd have to be Boston's first album, specifically More Than a Feeling. And then I'm also a country fan and a true Canadian at heart. So any early Shania Twain would have to be on the playlist.
Oh, right. I'm already getting a good picture of what it sounds like in your kitchen when you're cooking. Okay, yeah, great. Thanks, Travis. All right. Well, thank you for joining us. And like I say, there's some contact information below the podcast. But yeah, Travis Hughson, thanks ever so much for joining us on Music Ally Focus.
Thanks, Joe.
So thanks again to Travis for shining some light on that complex world. And you'll find links to Tipalti and the other stuff we discussed beneath the podcast. Feel free to email me anytime, folks. It's joe@musically.com. That's joe@musically.com. And that's it for us this week. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for listening. I've been Joe Sparrow. You have been you. And until next time, farewell.